Imagine a warrior who didn't see the battlefield, but controlled it better than anyone who did. His enemies never understood why he always knew where they stood, why he moved before they moved, why he blocked attacks he shouldn't have known were coming, why their carefully planned ambushes failed again and again. They didn't know his secret. He wasn't guided by sight. He was guided by everything else. The scrape of a sandal on dirt, the hiss of a blade slicing air, the faint shift of weight when a man prepares to kill. He heard all of it. He felt all of it, and he reacted with terrifying precision. One soldier who fought him said this: "It was like fighting a ghost. You swing, he's gone. You step, he's already there." Once, 3 men attacked him from different sides. He turned, stepped once, and all 3 fell before they even realized he'd moved. Another time, an archer thought he was safe. He pulled the string, but before he could release the arrow, the blind warrior closed the distance and shattered the bow in his hands. He didn't fear darkness. He lived in it. He became it. To him, sight was a distraction. He didn't need eyes to kill. He didn't need light to win. When others panicked, he became silent, still, unstoppable. He didn't see the battlefield. He felt it breathing, and that made him the most terrifying fighter you could ever face. He was 12, and men triple his age followed his orders without question. Not because they respected him, not at first, but because he kept winning. When other children played with toys, he played with war. He studied maps the way others studied books. He memorized formations like poems. He learned how fear moves through a crowd, faster than arrows, faster than fire. His first battle came before his voice even changed. The enemy thought they were facing scared boys. They laughed. They rode forward casually, shields lowered, certain this would be easy. It wasn't. The boy general watched calmly, silent, still. Then he gave a signal so small that half his men missed it. The enemy didn't, because suddenly arrows rained from a direction they never expected. A perfectly timed crossfire, executed by children. The enemy commander panicked. He shouted orders no one followed. His formation collapsed like a house of cards. The boy didn't cheer. He didn't smile. He didn't even blink. He simply walked through the chaos, giving new commands as if he had rehearsed the battle weeks in advance. He saw patterns, angles, weaknesses, moments. He moved pieces on the battlefield like a chessboard, and everyone else were pawns. In one famous clash, he predicted exactly when the enemy cavalry would charge, down to the heartbeat. When they approached, he ordered his men to part, creating a narrow gap. The cavalry rushed into it, believing it was an opening. It wasn't. It was a trap. Hidden spearmen rose from the flanks like jaws closing. In seconds, the elite horsemen were crushed. By sunset, the boy stood on a hill overlooking another victory. Blood on his boots, wind in his hair, eyes cold. Men older, stronger, larger than him knelt at his feet. Not because he demanded it, but because they knew. He saw tomorrow's battle, while everyone else was still fighting today's. He wasn't just a prodigy. He was a storm in human form. A child who rewrote the rules of war. They didn't fear armies. They didn't fear warlords. They didn't fear wolves. But they feared him. Not because he was loud, not because he was cruel, but because he was impossible to stop. He was a monk, a man of prayer, a man of silence. And yet, when invaders came, he became something else. A storm in human form. The first time they saw him, they laughed. A single monk, barefoot, with a wooden stick. They thought it would be easy. It wasn't. The first invader swung his sword. Before the blade even reached him, crack. The man's wrist shattered. He screamed. The second attacker charged. The monk turned. One smooth motion, and the man dropped as if hit by a falling tree. 3 more came. He didn't step back. He stepped forward, staff spinning, feet gliding, eyes calm. He moved like water, but hit like stone. In one legendary moment, an archer aimed an arrow at his chest. Point blank. No way to dodge. The monk didn't dodge. He raised 2 fingers and caught the arrow mid-flight. The invaders froze. Some stopped breathing. Then he snapped the arrow in half without breaking eye contact. From that day, they called him the Silent Demon. Once, a dozen warriors surrounded him. They were armed. He wasn't. They attacked all at once. He didn't panic. He didn't shout. He didn't even change his expression. He just moved. By the time the dust settled, 12 men lay groaning on the ground. Broken, defeated, humiliated. The monk stood alone, calm, still, unharmed. But what made him terrifying was not his strength or speed or skill. It was his silence. He fought without anger, without fear, without hesitation. The enemy roared like animals. He answered with stillness. And stillness always wins. He wasn't supposed to exist. Men this strong don't happen naturally. Men this hard don't survive childhood. Men this fearless don't usually live long enough to earn a name. But he did. And the name he carried through battlefields was whispered like a curse. The Iron Wolf. No one knew where he came from. Some claimed he was raised by a northern tribe who taught their sons to feel no pain. Others swore he was born during a thunderstorm, lightning striking the earth at the exact moment he took his first breath. But everyone agreed on one thing. He was built for war. When he stepped onto the battlefield, soldiers didn't see a man. They saw a force. Broad shoulders, a back like a fortress wall, eyes that didn't blink, a scar along his jaw where a blade had once failed to finish him, and he carried a weapon that matched his personality. Not elegant, not noble, just brutal. A warhammer with a head so heavy it took 2 normal men to lift it. He swung it with one hand. When armies clashed, the Iron Wolf didn't fight in lines. He charged ahead of everyone, smashing shields, bones, and morale. Men didn't fight him. They tried to survive him. There's a story, told by men who swore it happened, about the battle where he became a legend. 100 enemies surrounded him after his own squad fell. Archers were ordered to bring him down, no matter the cost. Arrows rained. Spears closed in. Swords flashed. He didn't retreat. He didn't bargain. He didn't even bother to look scared. Instead, he slammed the hammer into the ground so hard the earth shook, looked the enemy commander straight in the eyes, and growled, "Come and die." What happened next became legend. The first line rushed him and fell instantly. The second line hesitated and fell anyway. The third simply broke and ran. Hours later, the battlefield was silent, except for the sound of the Iron Wolf dragging his hammer behind him, leaving a trail carved into the dirt. People said he walked away because death couldn't catch him. Others claimed death tried, and gave up. Whatever the truth, one thing echoed for generations. He didn't just survive the battle. He owned it. And long after kingdoms faded and empires collapsed, the stories remained of the man who stood alone and made entire armies afraid of the dark. They called her the Widow Blade, not because she mourned anyone, but because everyone she faced left someone else to mourn. She wasn't born extraordinary. She didn't grow up a prodigy. No, she was small, quiet, forgettable, the kind of girl people looked past. But life has a cruel way of sharpening the overlooked. Her transformation began on a winter night so cold the stars themselves seemed to freeze. Bandits swept through her village, stealing food, burning homes, tearing apart everything that made her world safe. She hid under the floorboards. She heard screams. She heard begging. She heard her mother's last breath. And when silence finally came, it wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of someone who had no more tears left to cry. She rose from the ruins like a ghost, face smeared with ash, eyes hollow, hands trembling, not from cold, but from the realization that she was alone. That night created 2 things, a graveyard and a purpose. She found a blade in the wreckage, warped from the fire, edge chipped. But when she lifted it, her grip tightened as if the metal recognized her. What followed became legend. She didn't confront the raiders all at once. She hunted them, one outpost at a time, one man at a time. She didn't kill with rage. She killed with focus. She moved with impossible silence. Her steps were whispers. Her blade was a question. Her victims were the answer. But the moment that turned her from a fighter into a myth came much later. She finally cornered the raider leader in a ruined watchtower. Snowstorm raging, wind screaming. His torch barely lit the darkness. "You're alone," he snarled. "You can't win." She stepped forward slowly, calm, precise, terrifying. But then something unexpected happened. A small child stumbled out from behind the raider, a child she hadn't seen, a child she could have hurt. Everything froze. The raider grabbed the boy and pressed a knife to his throat. "Drop your blade," he ordered. For the first time in years, she hesitated, not from fear, but from humanity, and he mistook hesitation for weakness. He lunged, but she was faster. She didn't slash. She didn't stab. She simply moved, a blur of instinct. When the snow settled, the raider lay bleeding on the floor. The child trembled. She knelt beside him, wiped her blade clean, softened her voice. "It's over," she whispered. "You're safe." The boy stared at her, not with fear, but awe. Because in that moment, she wasn't the Widow Blade. She wasn't vengeance. She wasn't death. She was the survivor who protected the living, and that is why her legend endured, not because she made widows, but because she refused to let the world turn her into the monster it tried to create. They called him the man who wouldn't die. It wasn't a legend. It wasn't exaggeration. It was the only explanation people could find. His life should have ended a dozen times. A fall from the fortress wall, a spear lodged inches from his heart, a fever that devoured whole battalions, buried alive by mistake, frozen half to death in a siege. But life kept dragging him back. Or maybe something else did. The moment that defined him came not on the battlefield, but beneath it. During a brutal winter campaign, he collapsed from exhaustion and wounds. His pulse slowed, his breath faded. The medics believed he was gone. They threw his body onto a wagon of the dead. He woke in the freezing darkness under a crush of corpses. He couldn't scream. The bodies smothered his voice. He couldn't move, arms and legs pinned. The weight of death pressed down on him. For a moment, the world was nothing but darkness and terror. But then he saw something, a sliver of light leaking through a crack above him. A single thin line, cold, pure, real. He clawed toward it with everything he had left. Nails cracked, skin tore, blood froze, but he reached it. When he burst out of that pile, the soldiers around him dropped their torches in shock. They swore they saw a man rise from the dead. That moment changed him. From then on, he fought not as a survivor, but as a man living on borrowed time. Each strike had purpose. Each battle had clarity. Each breath felt like a rebellion. His defining stand came months later at the siege of Black Cliff. The enemy surged through the broken gate. The defenders ran, but he didn't. He planted his feet in the breach, just one man against the tide. Arrows rained, shields shattered, blood pooled at his boots. He stayed. At one point, a sword cut across his ribs so deep that others would have fallen. Instead, he laughed, a sharp, broken laugh that chilled the air around him. The enemy hesitated. "Why won't you die?" one soldier screamed. He wiped blood from his eyes and answered calmly, "Because I haven't finished yet." By dusk, the attackers retreated, not from defeat, but from fear. They whispered that he was not a man, but a punishment, a warning, a walking reminder that death is not always enough. After the battle, a young recruit found him sitting alone, hands trembling, breathing slow. "What keeps you alive when others fall?" the boy asked. He looked at the horizon, where the crack of light from his grave once shone. "A promise," he said. "To whom?" the boy whispered. He didn't answer, and that silence was louder than any roar. Because some men carry ghosts, some men carry destiny, and some men carry the weight of a story that refuses to end. They called him the Whisper in the Dark, not because he was silent, but because silence followed him. He grew up forgotten, a child no one bothered to teach, protect, or love, a boy who learned early that people notice pain only when it screams. So he stopped screaming. He stopped talking, stopped asking, stopped hoping. Instead, he listened. The world revealed itself to him through tiny sounds others ignored: the scrape of leather on stone, the crack of a twig under cautious feet, the shift of breath before an ambush. He could hear danger before it existed, but the night he became a legend happened when the valley was attacked. Screams tore through the darkness. Torches extinguished. Rain hammered the rooftops like drums of war. Men shouted. Steel clashed. Chaos swallowed everything. But in the middle of this storm, he stood unnervingly still. While others fled or swung wildly in panic, he melted into the shadows. He synchronized with the rain's rhythm. He let the darkness choose him. 3 raiders crept toward him, thinking he was blind. But he heard them long before he saw them. One breathing fast, one dragging his left foot, one tightening his grip right before attacking. He struck first, a blur, a whisper, a silhouette dissolving into rain. When dawn broke, the valley was full of bodies. But nobody saw who fought. Nobody understood how one silent man could stand against so many, except one girl, a child whose hiding place he had passed. She swore she saw him step between attackers like water flowing between rocks. She said his eyes flashed, not with fury, but with pain. Because in that moment, she saw something no one else did. He wasn't fighting enemies. He was fighting the world that ignored him. The world that made him invisible long before he mastered invisibility. His legend reached its peak years later, during the fall of Greywall Fortress. An entire invading army broke through the defenses. Hundreds rushed in, confident in the slaughter to come. But then the killing stopped. Not slowly, not chaotically. Suddenly, soldiers collapsed one by one, silently, cleanly, precisely, as if death itself had taken a vow of quiet. Those who survived claimed they saw shadows move without bodies, whispers behind them that weren't wind. A shape crouched on the battlements, waiting for the exact heartbeat to strike. By dawn, every invader lay scattered across the courtyard, eyes wide, mouths frozen in the realization that death doesn't always roar. Sometimes it barely breathes. The defenders found him seated beside the gate, rain dripping from his hood, hands trembling slightly. "What are you?" one soldier asked. "How did you kill an entire army alone?" He lifted his head just enough for them to see the scar that cut across his throat, a wound from his past, a reminder that someone once tried to silence him forever. And he whispered, "They weren't alone." The soldier frowned. "What do you mean?" He pointed upward, toward the ravens perched on the ruined walls, toward the shadows cast by the broken towers, toward every sound the night carried but men ignored. His voice barely audible. "The darkness helps those who belong to it." And before they could answer, he stepped backward and vanished into the shadows that shaped him. The shadows he mastered. The shadows that kept him alive. He didn't disappear. He went home. They called him the Storm Eater, but storms weren't his enemy. They were his reflection. He was born during one. Lightning split an old oak in half, thunder crashed like a war drum, and his mother cried out with pain so raw that even the midwives believed the storm answered her. People whispered that the sky branded the child. Others said the storm took something from him the moment he was born, because from that night on, he was never afraid of anything. Except one thing, losing someone he loved. He grew up wild, chasing lightning, running into waves, standing on cliffs when others hid below. He didn't fear death. He feared silence. He feared being too late, because when he was 6, he failed. A mudslide hit the valley after a storm. His older sister slipped into the river. He lunged to grab her, but his small hands couldn't hold. The water tore her away. Her scream was swallowed by thunder. Her body never returned. That memory became the wound the storm carved into him. A wound that never healed. Years later, when raiders attacked the village and kidnapped his younger brother, the old fear returned. Not fear of enemies, not fear of steel, fear of being too late again. So when the storm exploded across the mountains that night, wind howling, rain turning paths into rivers, he didn't hide. He ran into it, his clothes soaked instantly. The cold stabbed him, mud tried to pull him down, but he climbed, higher, faster, harder. Every flash of lightning lit a memory of his sister. Every roar of thunder echoed the sound of her slipping from his grasp. Every step felt like he was racing against the past. When he reached the raiders' camp, lightning revealed their silhouettes. Dozens of them, armed, ready. He didn't hesitate. He fought like the storm had chosen him, like the wind pushed his strikes, like thunder guided his rage. But he wasn't invincible. He bled. He slipped. He fell to his knees more than once. At one moment, a raider's blade slashed deep across his shoulder. His legs buckled. His vision split. Rain turned red around him. He heard his brother cry out. He heard the storm rage. He heard his own breath breaking. And he forced himself back up. Not because he was strong, but because he refused to fail twice in one lifetime. When he faced the warlord holding his brother hostage, the lightning behind him illuminated the truth. He wasn't a force of nature. He was a wounded man fighting the fate that once beat him. The warlord sneered, "Take one more step and the boy dies." His voice drowned in the storm. The Storm Eater stepped forward anyway. Lightning struck the cliff, exploding stone. The shockwave threw the warlord off balance. The boy fell free. The Storm Eater lunged, driving his spear through the warlord's heart. The storm eased. The wind softened. He collapsed to his knees, pulling his brother close, holding him so tightly as if the world might try to take him too. And in that moment, he wasn't a legend. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't the Storm Eater. He was just a man who refused to let the storm win a second time. Years later, people told stories of him walking through lightning. But the wise ones knew the truth. Lightning didn't protect him. Thunder didn't guide him. The storm didn't strengthen him. His heartbreak did. They called her the Blood Scribe, the woman who wrote fate in ink and blood. Unlike the others, she wasn't born into storms or forged by war. Her power came from something quieter and far more terrifying. Memory. She remembered everything. Every face, every voice, every lie, every broken oath, every hand that hurt her, every word whispered behind her back, every promise made and forgotten. Her mind was a perfect map of pain. As a child, she was praised for it. People gave her books, puzzles, tasks. Write this, they said. Learn this. Remember this. She did. But she also remembered how they laughed at her when she stumbled, how they mocked her when she cried, how they abandoned her when her father died, leaving her alone with a house full of silence. Loneliness became her ink. Sorrow became her parchment. She began keeping a journal, but it wasn't a diary of thoughts. It was a ledger of every injustice she witnessed, and every person responsible. Years passed. Her list grew longer. Then came the Great Burning, a massacre disguised as an accident. The local lord, drunk and careless, ordered torches brought to the grain stores. The flames spread faster than expected. Homes ignited, animals suffocated, people screamed. Her mother died in that inferno. The Lord blamed the villagers blamed the storm. But the blood scribe remembered the truth. She watched the Lord laugh as smoke filled the valley. Something cracked inside her. She didn't scream, didn't attack, didn't cry. She simply turned, walked back into her burned home, and picked up her book. The last page was blank. She dipped her quill in soot, in ash, in a few drops of blood from her burned fingers, and she wrote his name. That night she began her journey, not for vengeance, not for justice, for accuracy. Her path was methodical, cold, calm. She tracked down witnesses, scribes, captains, priests. She collected stories, contradictions, lies. She became an archivist of human cruelty. Her defining moment came when she finally confronted the Lord responsible for her mother's death. He sat in his high tower, wine in hand, surrounded by sycophants. He mocked her. "You came all this way? For what? Revenge?" She eyed the tower's shelves, rows upon rows of ledgers, maps, documents. She pulled her own book from her cloak, the one filled with names, dates, betrayals. "The truth," she said softly. "I came for the truth." She threw the book onto his table. It opened exactly to the page with his name, ink smeared. Blood darkened the corners. He laughed until he realized every other name in the book was dead. His face drained. "Who are you?" he whispered. She stepped closer. "I'm the one who remembers what everyone else forgets." That night, his tower burned, just like the grain stores years before. But this time, the fire had a witness, and the valley finally saw justice written in flames. People told stories of her afterward. Some feared her, some admired her. Some claimed she still walked the world, documenting the sins of the powerful. Because the blood scribe didn't fight with swords or storms or shadows, she fought with the sharpest weapon of all, memory. They called him the Bone Laugher because he laughed in the face of death, literally, not bravado, not madness. Something in him broke long ago and never healed. He was a gravedigger's son, grew up around silence and soil, a childhood filled with funerals instead of festivals. He knew death before he knew joy. He saw corpses before he saw friends. He learned early that life was fragile, but instead of fearing it, he mocked it. Even as a boy, he laughed at funerals, not out of disrespect, but because the grief around him felt unbearable, and laughter was his only shield. People called him cursed, possessed, unstable. But when war came, they called him something else, indispensable. Because in the midst of terror, when cries filled the battlefield, when blood soaked the earth, when the living fell like cut wheat, he stood unshaken. While others panicked, he laughed. A strange, low, bone-deep laugh that made enemies step back, weapons trembling in their hands. He wasn't fearless. He simply understood something no one else did. Death came for everyone, but it had to go through him first. His moment of legend came during the siege of Hollow Downs. An entire battalion was surrounded. Men screamed. Horses reared, arrows fell like rain, morale shattered. Except for him. He climbed onto a broken wagon, raised his battered shield, and shouted, "If we're dying today, let's make death regret the visit." Then he laughed, loud and wild, as arrows slammed into wood around him. The sound carried across the battlefield, echoing over steel and screams. It didn't scare the enemy, it terrified them. Because anyone who laughs under a rain of arrows isn't normal, isn't predictable, isn't safe. He fought with reckless brilliance, charging where others froze, shield slamming, axe swinging, footsteps pounding like drums. He didn't fight to survive. He fought to challenge the world itself. At the height of battle, a massive enemy commander struck him down, axe to his spine. He collapsed, blood pouring, vision fading. A soldier kneeling beside him whispered, "Are you afraid now?" He coughed, blood on his lips, smile on his face, and said in a voice full of broken joy, "Afraid? Finally? Something interesting." Then he stood back up, somehow. Broken spine, cracked ribs, legs shaking, and he charged again. The enemy faltered. They pulled back. They ran. Not because he was unstoppable, but because he refused to fall. Later, when the battle ended, they found him sitting among the fallen, laughing softly to himself. When someone asked him why, he answered simply, "Death is patient, but so am I." They called her the last candle, because even when the world went dark, she refused to stop burning. She wasn't a warrior. She wasn't a queen. She wasn't a sorceress. She was a healer. A small, quiet girl with trembling hands who grew into a woman the world feared. Not because she was dangerous, but because she was unbreakable. Her village lay at the edge of the world. Cold winters, bleak fields, a place where life came slow and death came fast. People there learned to accept loss. They buried children with numb faces. They lost fathers to disease. They lost mothers to hunger. But she never accepted loss. When she was 10, her little brother fell ill. She sat by his bedside for 3 days straight. Fed him, sang to him, held his hand. On the 4th day, he died. Everyone moved on. Everyone except her. She stared at his empty bed and made a vow. "As long as I breathe, I will not let the light go out." She grew up studying herbs, poultices, cures. She walked miles each day to gather plants others overlooked. She learned to read people's pain before they said a word. But the night she became a legend was the night the plague came. Dark sores, choking coughs, bodies carried to the river at dusk. A sickness that turned hope into shadow. People fled. People hid. People prayed. She lit a candle. One small flame in a room full of dying people. Her hands trembling. Her eyes stinging. Her breath tight. But she stayed. She moved from bed to bed, whispering comfort, wiping brows, giving water, holding hands. She couldn't save everyone. In fact, she saved few, but she refused to abandon any. The plague took her mother, her friends, her neighbors. Still, she stayed. Night after night, she lit the same candle. Its flame grew lower as the disease spread. On the 4th week, exhaustion hit her hard. Her hands shook so violently she dropped a bowl of water. People begged her to stop. "You'll die." Her answer, "Then I'll die lit." On the final night, her body nearly collapsed. She leaned on walls, on tables, on anything she could. Her vision blurred, her lungs burned. But there was one child left, a small girl crying in a corner. The candle knelt beside her, held her, sang to her, stayed awake until dawn. When morning came, the child opened her eyes. Alive. The candle lay beside her, unconscious but breathing. The plague ended weeks later. Many died, many survived, and no one forgot the woman who refused to let darkness take everyone. They called her the last candle, not because she conquered death, but because she stood between it and the living with nothing but a flame and her will. Years later, villagers would swear that when storms rolled in and the wind howled through the valley, they saw a small flickering light move between the houses, a reminder that even the smallest flame can hold back the night. He reached the edge of the ravine just as the storm broke open above him. Not rain, not mist, but a cold, furious wind that felt like fingers dragging across his skin. The sky wasn't black. It was bruised blue, as if something enormous had pressed its weight onto the world. And then he saw her. Celine stood on the cliffside, half silhouetted, hair whipped sideways, cloak snapping like a torn banner. But something was different now, something terrifying. Her eyes weren't just glowing. They were lit from within, like molten metal held on the brink of bursting. She turned her head slowly. Too slowly. As if she were waking from a dream she never wanted to wake from. "Celine," he choked out. She didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't move, just stared. Behind her the storm twisted, not clouds but a spiraling void, swallowing light, bending the air. And for a heartbeat, he thought he saw shapes in the darkness. Hands, faces, shadows, writhing silently and desperately. It felt like the entire mountainside was leaning toward her, drawn by that impossible glow. He stepped closer, fighting the gale. "What did you do?" His voice broke. Her reply was barely human, a whisper carved from wind and sorrow. I didn't open the door. It opened me. Lightning cracked the sky, illuminating everything in a single brutal flash. Her feet weren't on the ground. She hovered, inches above the cliff edge, and the wind didn't just whip her cloak. It swirled around her in precise, impossible spirals, obeying her, circling her like loyal wolves. He felt the truth hit him like a punch. She wasn't fighting the storm. She was the storm. The trees below bent toward her. Loose stones lifted from the earth. Dust spiraled upward in thin, trembling columns. The world itself was holding its breath. He reached a shaking hand toward her. "Celine, please." Her eyes flickered, just a moment, on the faintest spark of the girl he once knew. And then they turned pure gold, bright enough to cast shadows behind him. The air exploded with a soundless pressure wave. His knees buckled. He tasted blood. The ground cracked. And suddenly the wind died. Silence. Total. Absolute. Celine lowered her gaze to him, not angry, but impossibly sad. "You can't follow me anymore," she said. "Not where I'm going." And with that, the swirling void behind her expanded, not roaring, not howling, but unfolding like the petals of some enormous, ancient flower. She stepped backward into it, and the world swallowed her whole. He stood on the edge of the ravine long after the storm had passed. The world around him settled back into silence. Ordinary silence. Not the living, breathing kind that followed her. Just wind in the leaves. Just the distant cry of a bird. Just life, moving on without asking permission. The crack in the earth where Celine vanished had healed overnight. No scar, no proof. As if the world had already decided to forget her. But he couldn't. He walked the same path every dawn, tracing the memory of her footsteps. The places where she used to smile, where she used to laugh, where she told him secrets meant for no one else. Some days he thought he could almost hear her voice in the wind. Soft, nearby, calling. Other days he feared he imagined all of it. The glow in her eyes, the impossible storm, the doorway that swallowed her. But deep inside he knew the truth. The world had changed the moment she stepped through. Something shifted. Something woke up. A new kind of silence lingered everywhere he went. Not empty, but waiting. For months he wondered what she meant by her final words. "Not where I'm going." But slowly, painfully, he began to understand. She didn't leave him. She didn't abandon him. She crossed into something ancient, something dangerous, something that had chosen her long before she ever realized it. And maybe someday the door would open again. But not for him. Not yet. Not until the world was ready, or until she called him back. He turned away from the ravine one last time. This time, he didn't look over his shoulder, because even though the world had swallowed her light, something of hers had stayed behind. A warmth in the wind, a trembling in the earth, a reminder that some stories don't end. They echo, and if you listen closely, you can still hear her.